Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Autism Exploration Series. I'm Emily, the Clinical Director of Field Services here at Verbal Beginnings. Verbal Beginnings' mission is to change lives for our clients, families, and our professionals. We do that through our pledge of care, our promise to you, to provide effective treatment through compassionate care. We also strive to achieve our mission through our core values. One of our core values is education, teaching families such as yourself valuable ways to work with your child. And that's why we decided to start these series. Additionally, you'll see the seal of the Behavior Health Center of Excellence and the seals from the Autism Commission of Quality. Both of these seals represent the hard work and focus that we place to ensure that Verbal Beginnings is providing quality care through the highest standards. Okay, next slide, please. I also wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you to the services that we offer here at Verbal Beginnings. In addition to our in-home and center-based ABA services, we also offer center-based comprehensive services, feeding therapy, and social skills programming. Additionally, we encourage you to participate with us today throughout the presentation by using the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. We also offer closed captioning during this recording, which you can access by navigating to the bottom of your Zoom screen and clicking the closed captioning button on the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our presenter for the evening, Dr. Stephanie Nostit.
Thank you, Dr. Stampone. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. You'll have to forgive me. I'm just going to give you a little warning. I am coming over the flu and I still have a lingering cough. So I have plenty of water, plenty of liquids next to me. So I might have to stop intermittently and take a little sip or perhaps turn my head and cough. So just bear with me. But I'm very excited to be here today and have the opportunity to present to you all on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So a little bit about me. In 2005, I graduated from Worcester State University in Massachusetts. That's where I am born and raised, and I currently reside. So I became a speech language pathologist in 2005. And after working for and consulting with a lot of private schools that were out of district placements for children on the spectrum or who had mental health diagnoses or had pretty severe speech and language diagnoses and deficits, I found myself really gravitating towards a lot of my colleagues in the BCBA department. And so I was kind of built up by them and really kind of empowered to go back to school and become a BCBA myself. And so I always wanted to get my PhD in something that complemented what I was currently doing and that would make me an even better provider and clinician. And so I finally went back to school, became a BCBA in 2009, which seems like an eternity ago these days. And then in December of 2020, it only took a world pandemic, but I did finally defend my dissertation from Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts. And here I am. I came to Verbal Beginnings a little over a year ago now. And actually, I was just talking with Dr. Stampone, and we were talking about how basically exactly a year ago this month was my first autism exploration. And it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to present to a lot of colleagues, excuse me, clinicians and families regarding some pretty important topics. Okay, so now it's time for our first poll, and we're going to talk about what do you all in here consider a form of AAC? What is considered a form of AAC? And we do have multiple choice answers here. So just take a moment and answer the poll, and then we will display the results. We'll give it a couple more seconds. All right, so here are our results. So about 5% said picture exchange communication. About 20% said speech generated devices. No one said solely manual sign. And then 75% and the majority of you said all of the above, and you would be correct. So AAC alternative augmentative communication encompasses a lot more than just some of the more common terms like PECS, sign, um, speech output, or speech generated devices. It kind of encompasses all of that. And I have a really great picture to show you all that I think will help conceptualize this for you all. Let me just see. Of course, the slide sometimes gets stuck after the poll question, so give me 1 second. There we go. Okay. Excuse me. So if you look at this visual, oops, if you look at this visual, and we're talking about what are types of alternative augmentative communication, or AAC. There are two main categories to AAC, which isn't often discussed. And it's a very important breakdown for individuals when you're looking to choose a form of AAC. So you have unaided AAC, and they don't require any external equipment or tools. Unaided, okay, no external equipment and tools. And then you have aided AAC, which requires the use of something, some sort of equipment or tool in addition to the person's body. So this is a very important distinguishing characteristic about AAC, again, that a lot of people don't understand. There's such a large umbrella. And when you think about unaided AAC, it incorporates gestures, signs. You can see that there's facial expressions here, body language, and also some vocalizations as well. And so when you think about unaided alternative augmentative communication, there are other forms or other ways that are non-traditional in which a person is using to supplement or to augment forms of communication. And then when you think about aided alternative augmentative communication, you have that broken down in any even further, excuse me, in terms of low tech and high tech forms of communication. So low tech, and probably the most common, as you saw in our poll question, is a really great example is picture exchange communication system, or PECS. And so that is where an individual, and we'll get into this a little bit further, is using picture symbols or actual photographs printed out in order to pick up, reach, and release the item or the photo or the icon into the hand of the communication partner. So the picture, the symbol, actually takes the place of the vocal word. And so that's probably the most common form of low-tech AAC. There's also individuals that I have taught to use whiteboards and to write. So for individuals who have suffered a stroke, perhaps, or individuals who, may have, a loss of word finding skills, it might help them to write things in order to be able to fill in the gaps or augment their communication. So that's another form of low tech AAC. Drawings can be a really great supplement to functional communication to somewhat fill in the gaps so that the communication partner more readily understands the message that's intended. And then when you think about high tech forms of AAC, this includes the speech generated devices that we think about. So most commonly, we see a lot of individuals use iPads with specific applications like Prologo to Go, Touch Chat, Lamp is another one that is out there. There's a number of apps that are out there that you can trial with individuals, each with its benefits. And we kind of, as we're going through the process of evaluating on what's the most effective one for an individual, we think about the individual as a whole, their learning style, but also the setup, the layout, and the longevity in the use of the particular application. You can also use a computer with some of these applications. And there are other devices that we'll get into a little bit later too that companies have developed, such as the company Dynavox, that are a little bit more advanced and used with individuals who have cerebral palsy and a lot of other neurological disorders as well. So again, the world of AAC, excuse me, I told you I was going to be coughing, I apologize. The world of AAC encompasses a lot, and it's important to really understand the breakdown of AAC before you go looking for help, because when you're speaking with an individual or when you're thinking about your son, your daughter, your niece, nephew, husband, wife, sister, brother. You want to have a good understanding of what it is accessible to them throughout the course of an evaluation, or even simply when you're talking with their therapist or their care providers regarding something that they might be recommending. So this is poll number 2, and this is a true or false question. So is AAC meant to replace vocal speech? And this question is being asked for a very specific reason because I come across this a lot in my line of work. We'll give it a couple more seconds. All right, let's see our results. So, false. I am so happy that all of you, the majority of you, 89% of you stated false, and that is correct. AAC is not intended to replace vocal speech. It's actually intended to enhance it. So there's ways in which you can do this clinically. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into this discussion because there are some common myths around AAC that unfortunately don't get discussed with parents, caregivers, clinicians. Um, Most times, and this has happened to myself, you might be sitting with a client and all of a sudden a device shows up and you're like, wow, I didn't recommend this, but it looks really fantastic. There's obviously an idea behind this. There's a person who instituted this or who started the process of using this, but I'm not privy to that information. And sometimes parents and caregivers have been on the receiving end of this where they're at home, child gets off the bus, and then they have a PECS book and they're like, okay, well, I just inherited this new system of communication. Are they saying my child's never going to speak? So I think the first thing I can say as a provider is communication is key, not solely for the people that we are treating and the people we're providing care to, but for caregivers and all stakeholders. So, as a team, clinicians, parents, caregivers, we all have to work together to communicate and get on the same page and have one common goal. And when we are thinking about exploring the world of AAC, it's a much deeper conversation than just kind of picking something out of a magazine and thinking that it looks nice and adding it. There's a lot that goes into really kind of tailoring the communication device, whatever it may be, or the form of AAC that you decide to supplement functional communication. There's a lot of information gathering that needs to occur, and there also needs to be a moment where we meet as a team and we kind of design, long-term picture. What is our overarching goal? If we are using AAC as a method to enhance speech, how are we doing that? And that needs to be talked about across environments. It shouldn't be taking place solely in the classroom. It shouldn't be taking place solely in the center. The generalization occurs at home, the generalization occurs in the community. And so everybody needs to be part of the conversation so that way everybody is implementing it in the correct way. And there's a lot of troubleshooting that goes on. I can't tell you how many times when I create a picture exchange communication book for an individual where we may need to go back to the drawing board and we may need to talk about size of the icons, or we might need to talk about color of the background of the icons because the child's having or the individual's having an individual or the individuals having difficulty scanning. And there's different methodologies and different ways that you can actually use color prompts and color contrast as a way to enhance scanning capabilities so they can choose what they want more efficiently. So it's a lot that goes into this process. And that's why, yes, communication is key to teach an individual, but it's also so important to keep the team on the same page and that we are, in fact, having open communication as we're building these skills and as we're adding to the treatment plan and incorporating a device, whether it be low tech or high tech. Okay. So these are some pictures, and I have to laugh at the one on the right because it seems like it's so far outdated, but excuse me, that's kind of where AAC started when it came to more of the higher tech forms. You can see the picture at the bottom here. That is the picture of a traditional PAX. Oops, that's a picture of a traditional PAX book. You can see that there's the picture icons, and you notice that a lot of these icons are abstract icons, right? So when I'm talking about pictures versus icons, that's part of the conversation. Sometimes, in terms of receptive language and receptive understanding of the representation of symbols, you may need to scale back and build up to a more abstract use of symbols. So we may start with simple photographs of items and then print those up as you would just, if you went to CVS and got pictures printed, we would do the same thing and we would make them into picture icons, put some Velcro on the back and use those for the individual to use to represent the vocabulary. A lot of common, things that we would print up are foods, drinks, toys, preferred people, anything in their environment that is really reinforcing to them. And you see that yellow strip at the bottom, that's a sentence strip. And so that's how we start to build language and your typical subject, verb, object formations using that sentence strip. Typically, we do this by starting off with making requests. And so we might have an I and a want on there, and we might have them pick an item of something that they want off the book or from one of the pages within, finish the sentence. Like, let's say they were requesting a cookie. I want cookie. They would rip that strip right off and they would hand the strip over nicely. So instead of just requesting in one word using one picture, you're now requesting in a whole sentence. So that's how that book works. When we make them at Verbal Beginnings, we have a nice strap that comes with them so they can put them over their shoulder and carry them around because you want your voice or your words with you at all times, regardless of what environment you're in or regardless of who your audience is. When you look at some of the items on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a laptop there where you can use some of the software on. Again, a little bit more cumbersome, though, to carry around. So that has to be kind of a conversation. What is the overarching goal here? And we need to make sure that it's portable and it's easy to open up. And there's not a lot of response effort in terms of actually getting to the words needed to make the communication impactful for the communicator and also the listener. Some of these other lower tech forms, you can see the big buttons. Those are called big backs. And when you hit the button, a pre-recorded response is elicited. And so I've used these with a lot of individuals if they need a bathroom break, for example, and they're confined to a wheelchair. They're taught to request by hitting the button, and there would be a pre-recorded response saying, I need to use the bathroom. And then their caregivers, their CNAs, or their respite workers would be able to take them to the bathroom for their request. And you can see some of the other devices up top. Those are Go Talks, an older form of them. Now there's an application for Go Talk, which can go right on a tablet or an iPad. But these were, excuse me, set templates with a certain number of pictures on them. And when you hit or touch one of the buttons, it would elicit a response. And they actually, back in the day, they had papers where you would, print out the paper and you would have a grid and you would have to take the sheets and slide them in and out, which obviously is very cumbersome. And you can imagine in a period of, frustration, when you're feeling really upset, if you're trying to explain your feelings and you have to ruffle through a sleeve of papers, find the one that's for emotions, slide out the one for food and slide the other one in for emotions, a lot of response effort there to simply tell someone you're upset. And at that point, it's much easier to throw something, or to engage in challenging behavior. So as time has evolved, so too has alternative communication, and we're more on the high tech side of things because tech has improved so tremendously, which leads me to the last picture, which is on the left-hand side, where the little child is using a tablet, and you can see there's a lot of icons there, and there's a lot of potential in some of these applications. However, again, you see color coding going on there. In this particular device, they've color coded certain categories of words. So for example, I've done this where if a child has one page and it has about 20 to 30 icons on it, they're being taught that the items in purple there are the object part of the sentence. The items in green, those are your verbs. And then the items in yellow, those are your subjects. So I'm teaching them to build sentences, subject, verb, object, with things that are relevant to them and that help them be more efficient communicators. So again, you can use these. The traditional way that we start with them is by requests. When you think about neurotypical development, you think that a child, a typical 3-year-old, in the waking hours, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it feels some days that they're up 24 hours a day, but they are not. However, within the time period they're up, let's give it 12 hours, a typical 3-year-old will request up to 3,000 times a day, which if you're a parent, I'm sure you're laughing right now because you can imagine how frequently that is. I mean, my child, I feel like it's just he has a button and switches on when he walks through the door, and then the requests just come flooding through. Um, and that's what we shoot for, right? And so neurotypical development, we somewhat take that for granted because, all of this language, when children are going through a language burst, really just comes flooding out. And so that's what we shoot for, that rate, that frequency of requesting. And so when we're setting these up, we want communication to be fun, we want it to be effortless, and we want it to be right at their fingertips so that they can get up there and start requesting as frequently as your neurotypical 3-year-old would. And just some other examples that I've used in my career. So I had a client who was in his wheelchair, and he also had a gait trainer, which is it's a standing device, and you're kind of tethered to the device so that you can stand up if you have low tone in your legs, and you have the ability to stack if you need to. However, he needed a form of communication. And so we worked together with his team, and I trained him to actually use eye gaze in selecting the icons on his iPad or his device in order to, it was actually a Tobii device that we built into or that we grew into. He would use his eye gaze by looking at it for a certain amount of time. There was a delay set on it, so he could make a selection and communicate that way. I have used picture exchange communication, and I have paired it with vocals. So I had a client that came to me when he was 3 years old, just about to turn 3. He was non-vocal. He had no speech. The only sounds that would come out of him would be what we would call like a vocal stem or vocal stereotypy. They were non-functional speech sounds. So it almost sounded similar to cooing from a baby, but there was no function behind it. And it seemed like when he was doing it, he was very automatically reinforced by the sound of his own voice, which is why he would continuously do it. And so what we did was we started him on picture exchange communication, a book similar to the one in the middle of the screen there at the bottom. And as he started exchanging icons, he started becoming more vocal. He started having a lot more sounds coming out. So we started shaping those sounds, and we started pairing them with the picture exchanges. And I would prompt a lot of initial consonants with him, and I would go through these consonants in the way that they develop in terms of the sequence that a neurotypical child would develop. So the first series of sounds that typically develops are vowels during cooing. But then in terms of consonants, you develop bilabial sounds, which are sounds that are made with your two lips closing. And so the M, the B, the P, those are common ones that develop. And so I would pair those initial consonants with some of his most favorite things. So he loved to play ball. So as he was exchanging the ball with me during text, I would say buh, buh. And when he imitated me and exchanged the icon, I then made it a requirement. The more frequently he would vocalize, I made it a requirement for him to be vocal and exchange the icon. Then soon after, he started to kind of gradually shape his vocal speech more towards an approximation for ball. And eventually, we were able to fade out the peck. So now that same individual, I still check in with his family. He is actually 16 years old, which is crazy to me. And he is fully vocal. He doesn't use PECs anymore. He was using an iPad. He grew into a speech generated device because he had much more language and we wanted to get him to build more sentences, but now he's fully vocal. So just an example of how these tools can be used to really build speech. Now, it didn't happen overnight. This was years and years of services, myself working alongside the BCBA and us working collaboratively. Also, we incorporated the OT as well, but it was very successful. And again, he's vocal communicator now. That's his primary mode of communication. So, there that's with a lot of thought. That's with a lot of focus, a lot of drive, and a lot of communication with all members of the team. Okay, so I love this video I'm about to show you all because it's a great example of how SLPs can use AAC and other methods to train specific expressive, receptive, and social skills. And so speech generated devices, like I've mentioned, an iPad with a voice output app or Tobii Dynavox, um, they offer added benefit of bombarding the learner with a lot of auditory stimuli and auditory prompts throughout the course of the day. So it's almost like someone constantly talking in your ear and providing a lot of sound for you to listen to and to imitate and to mimic. So, as we all know, when children develop, they learn through imitation and modeling. And so, speech generated devices really kind of form the same pattern of imitation and modeling. They're constant models, and they almost correct, they're models of a correct vocal response that offers the individual the opportunity to imitate it regularly across the day. So when they're hitting the buttons and they're hearing the output, it's a prompt for them to imitate vocally. And they can pair their language and pair their voice with the voice they hear on the device. Now, some parents will say to me, oh my gosh, this thing sounds like a robot. The great part about it with technology, you can actually record your own voice, or you can actually find a voice within the device and download other voices. Now with AI and stuff, you have so many options. You can actually choose a voice that you feel, excuse me, would sound similar to your child or sounds similar to your child. When I first started off, I had kiddos where there was only like two grown male voices and they were using these devices, or a female voice. And the female voice was higher pitched, so it sounded more like a child. And so I would use this voice, and it was so limiting. And now, with all of the advancements, you have, there's the sky's the limit in terms of the type of voice. So I love this video. I'm going to play it for you all. And I think this speech pathologist does a really great job. She's teaching personal identification information, answering WH questions, and she's really doing a nice job prompting him by using the device, which is how you should teach. If you want someone to use a device effectively, you have to communicate with them in the mode that you're teaching them. And so she's using the device to teach him, which is a really wonderful example.
When is your birthday? Look for your birthday.
My birthday is January 20th, 2005.
Good. And what if you wanted to ask me about my birthday?
When is your birthday?
My birthday is in February. Good asking. Okay, go ahead and clear it. What if
My favorite show is Blippi.
Okay, clear it. Wait till I ask you first. Okay. So what if I asked you, where do you go to school?
I go to school at Sycamore High School.
Good answering. Nice job. Go ahead and clear it. Okay. What if I ask you, do you have pets? Do you have a dog?
I have a dog named Stella and gecko named Pearl.
Good.
My favorite show is Blippi.
Oh, you're trying to tell me about Blippi? You like Blippi? Yes or no? Yes. All right.
So what's really nice about that video as well is that she's actually honoring him and his sign too, which I really love about that. And so she is honoring his ability to communicate and his sign that he's using as well. So let me just exit out of here. So we can get back to our presentation.
Dr. Nassa, we did get a question if you wanted to pause and answer that one.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I'd love to.
The question is, if a family begins implementing an AAC device with Proloquo based on the recommendations of his SLP, are there resources available to help train, educate us as a BCBA, help support it in ABA therapy?
Yes. So that actually is a really great question. And so the first thing is I always tell people your biggest and best resource are actually the clinicians involved, right? And so what I tend to do is I tend to make sure that the family BCBA and speech pathologists are always on an introductory call together and kind of talking about, okay, what are we recommending? What is the plan? Is everybody in agreement with this device? Okay. That being said, what is our long-term goal here? Are we looking at a child who we all feel strongly that he is going to be a vocal communicator? If that is the case, then this is really a tool to teach vocal communication and then eventually fade out. And the importance behind including the BCBA and the importance behind including the family is that, each family has their own philosophy and each family has their own dynamic, their own traditions, so you have to really tailor what you're going to do with what is acceptable to the family at home as well. And the buy-in is key. The other thing is that when working with BCBAs, we see the child for, a lot of our kiddos receive speech at the center 30 minutes twice per week. And so with that being said, it's really important that we lean on the BCBAs and the ABATs because they're really there with them all day, every day. So when they might see some successes and they might see some things that are really impactful to what we teach in speech and vice versa. And we can also use their guidance around shaping up some new things on the device. So we might need to add more vocabulary. We might need to shrink the size of things. We might need to scale back a little bit because there might be too much on the screen. So we might need to hide things. So what I would say in terms of resources, always lean on your speech pathologist to kind of guide the process and direct you in along the right path, because sometimes when you go on the internet, it can become like this black hole and it can lead people in the wrong direction. And then sometimes when you have so much information being thrown at you, you lose sight of the overarching goal with each individual that you're working with. So, the key is open communication all the time. And ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, has a really like a wealth of information. Excuse me. And they also have a special interest group devoted to alternative augmentative communication. I also have some great resources at the end of this presentation to help people as well. And of course, when I made that full screen, I exited out of my PowerPoint. So 1 second, and then I'll share back with you guys.
And you let me know, Stephanie, when you would like to take a couple other questions. I got 3 more, but
Sure, you can actually do
whenever
it
you
right
want.
now as I'm pulling this back up. That'd be great.
Awesome. Okay. Somebody had asked, are there any journal articles that we can use to reference the recommendation to model using the modality the AAC user is being taught to communicate with?
That's a really great question. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of anything specifically. However, I can absolutely look at what ASHA has. ASHA, if you go onto the American Speech Language Hearing Association website and you type in AAC or you type in speech in AAC, you will find a whole host of journal articles that will pop up. And so I encourage you to take a peek at what they have there because they do have a lot. I have a journal article that is attached to this presentation that I've referenced in the back. And that actually has been really, really helpful for me in writing this and doing this presentation. And so feel free to take a peek at that one as well. It really kind of dissects and goes through the myths of AAC and, a lot of the common questions that clinicians get, but also that parents have as well with regard to the use of AAC. So I encourage you to do a deeper dive into the article that I have here. I'm just going to get us caught back up to where we were.
Perfect. I have 2 more, so you let me know. Do you want them now
Perfect.
or
No,
do you
keep
want them
going.
later?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. All right, next question is there any particular reason an SLP would push for a young client to use an AAC device and not PECs?
So that's a great question. And I think that for me, I can speak from my own experience because obviously I can't speak for other clinicians. What I typically do is I look at PECs and I look at the individual and I say, okay, what is their baseline? What do they have in terms of their receptive vocabulary, baseline repertoire, and how many words do they have? And then what about their expressive repertoire? And based from that, I look at and I say, okay, a typical 3-year-old would have about 300 words, 3 to 500 words. They're starting to make sentences. Where is this child in comparison to that? And where do I see them going? If I see that their repertoire far surpasses what PECs could really afford them, I would then recommend a speech generated device because they have access to much more vocabulary. If you think about it, PECs is really left up to the number of pages you have, how many icons you can fit inside. And once you start getting past 50 icons, it can be really cumbersome to carry that around, make sure you're not losing any. And that's a lot to put on a parent as well. And then there's a lot of response effort in terms of care and maintenance. So when you think about portability and you think about being able to keep everything together and support parents in a way that it's not creating more work and effort on them to maintain that buy-in, that's sometimes why I would say, you know what, this child is going places. X may be too limiting, and we may need to start with something that's a little bit more advanced. Even if we, even if we kind of scale back a little bit in terms of the number of icons on the page, that might be the rationale there. Do you want me to continue on, Emily, or did you have any more?
Yeah, I have 2 more, but
Yeah,
let's go
okay.
through a couple. Want to go through a couple slides and then
Yeah.
pause for the next 2?
Yeah, you shout out when you want to pop in.
All right.
All right. Excuse me, this cough is going to be the death of me. So, what are the benefits to AACs? That's something that is, I think kind of goes along. It's a nice like segue into this slide from the last question. So, a lot of what we want is when we have young children, they are very egocentric communicators. That's why we go and we start off with requesting because it's kind of about me, what I want it now, those sorts of things. And that's okay. That's developmentally appropriate. And so increased requesting can be a major benefit to AAC use. If you think about it with someone who's minimally vocal, they may not, their intelligibility may be poor. And when I say intelligibility, I mean their ability to be understood. And so if their vocal communication is only understood by a familiar listener and they're going to a center or they're in a center and they're having, staff for generalization purposes change up throughout the day. They're having a new staff take over. They're meeting, a number of peers throughout the day. They may not be able to be understood, and this can increase challenging behavior and frustration around communication. So increased requesting, and again, there's that number there, a typical neurotypical 3-year-old requests up to 3,000 times per day. That's something that we want to see. We want to see this really big language burst, and that's something that AAC can help with. It also can help with increased social communication. So we know that communication needs to be reciprocal in order for it to be effective, right? You have a speaker and you have a listener, and you kind of switch roles. It's bi-directional. And so social opportunities can be somewhat limited with poor communication skills. And so AAC is a really great way to enhance these types of social opportunities because you can really structure language and structure vocabulary around the typical environment. So the neurotypical environment. So for example, I had a child that was playing soccer and he really loved soccer, but he couldn't say things like pass to me. He couldn't say things like I'm open. He couldn't congratulate his peers when they scored a goal. It's like good job. He couldn't call his peers name. So we had his AAC device and he was carrying it around his neck, but it actually didn't work out because obviously he couldn't really run with it like being carried around his neck. So we actually came up with we detached it from like the strap, and we actually came up with a fanny pack, and we had it in there, and it had a plastic covering so he could use it around his waist. And we had one page that was out so he could call, and we cut a hole in the side so you could hear the speaker. And he was able to call for the ball. He was able to congratulate his peers. He was able to say good game and then the peer's name. And he was able to engage socially. And if it was just left up to his vocal speech, he would not have been able to do that. And so it was a really great social opportunity. And rather than his peers just passing him by because they might have been a little bit apprehensive about communicating with him or if he understood them, based on what they were able to observe when they was primarily just solely relying on vocal communication, it was a really wonderful opportunity. And the parents were just so happy because soccer was a very big part of their family culture. So it was really nice to see. And then also decrease challenging behavior. When communication is effortful, it's much easier to engage in challenging behavior. Head hitting, hopping to the ground, running and eloping, property destruction. These are things to us that seem, counterintuitive to what's socially appropriate, but it's much easier and much quicker to engage in those behaviors if they're getting you what you want. So I had a client whose mom, this poor woman, she had twins, and then she had a younger son, all three diagnosed with autism. And her son was engaging in, she was an amazing parent and so hands-on, but my heart went out to her because she was exhausted at the end of the day. And, her child was engaging in challenging behavior, and she found herself just kind of running around trying to figure out what he wanted in order to make it stop. Now, as clinicians, we look at that and we say, oh gosh, she's reinforcing that challenging behavior. But as a parent, and I am one, I have 3 kids, I totally understand. At the end of the day, you're exhausted and you just need some downtime and you want to make bedtime happen as quick as possible, bath time, just so you can have maybe 30 minutes to yourself to relax and decompress. And so the use of AAC changed this mom's life. And it opened up so many doors for her and her child to communicate. Challenging behaviors decreased and functional communication increased. And the child was having so much fun communicating because he got so much more of what he wanted from mom. And so it also kind of, increase their relationship too, and that mother-son bond. So that was a really, really nice thing for me as a clinician to see. And again, it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of work and a lot of collaboration with the BCBA, and in some cases the OT as well. But it was really meaningful. And I still talk to that family as well. And actually, all 3 of her sons now are in their 20s, and they have jobs and stuff, which is really wonderful. So, how do you know if your child or your client needs AAC? This is a really common question. And one myth is that, excuse me, a child needs to be a certain age prior to use. And some of these myths is really funny. I wonder where they started or who started the myth, where this came from. But the idea behind this is false. There is no, golden age to start using AAC. It really stems from where the child is at in terms of his or her, or the individual is at in terms of his or her communication skills, both receptively and expressively. And if they have any other modes of communication that are functional and working for them. But there is no specific age. And to be honest with you, I have had individuals, on the flip side, that have been neurotypical their entire life. They've been primary vocal communicators and they have a stroke, they have a traumatic brain injury, they have, some sort of trauma, and then they rely on AAC. So there is no, there's no age. It really solely is based on where they are at developmentally. And like any behavior, communication is a behavior. And so we can shape up any behavior and we can train any behavior. Communication is one of those behaviors. So what types of AAC are out there? So there's a lot of information about AAC, and for a lot of us, myself included, it can be really overwhelming. So I put this website, excuse me, here below. because this is extremely helpful in breaking down the following. So access methods. Um, Access methods, what I mean by that is how are you accessing the voice or the information, the communication from the device? So I did give you an example earlier of an individual that I worked with where he was taught to use eye gaze. That's an access method. Touch enter is when you're using your finger to touch a button and to elicit the voice on the screen. You can use those buttons that I mentioned earlier, which almost like serve as like mice, like a mouse, like a computer desktop mouse. That can be a mode of access. There are a number of different ways. And so it's really important to figure out how is the individual going to access the voice in the device. It gets into hardware devices and hardware peripherals. I'm not going to get into too much detail about that. However, what that simply means is how the device is made, and if it's something that's an actual device, like that sits on its own, like an iPad that you're going to use, versus something that's going to attach to like your TV, or it's going to attach to a computer, those sorts of things. It also gets into community access and connectivity. So what's really exciting about this is that you can, and I have worked with an individual where he was older. It's actually the same individual that I taught to use eye gaze. He was very limited in his ability to go out into the community. He became very fatigued as he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And he also had an immune disorder. And so he was very susceptible to germs. And especially during COVID, this was terrible for him. But his particular device allowed him to access blogs where he could talk to individuals who also had AAC and send message and communicate. He was able to send messages, text messages, use it as like a telephone, send messages to his team, connect with his family that lived like across the states, or even his family that lived in the same state but couldn't come over because they were quarantining because someone was sick, which is really exciting. I was able to do a lot with it. And so there's also environmental control that can happen. And so the same individual really loved cooking, but obviously with cerebral palsy, he didn't have really great motoric control of his arms and his hands. And so we actually used his device to be able to work things like the blender and the mixer so he could bake with his family, because that was something that they all really enjoyed doing together as a family, especially around the holidays. They were big in celebrating Christmases, and they are Italian like me, and so they do the cookie swaps and stuff. And so he was able to partake in that all from this AAC device. So again, this website here is a nice link in the presentation to kind of break down these even further and give some great examples with some of the major areas that I've indicated above. And so another myth about AAC is that, and I apologize for this typo, that the use of a communication device is going to stop a child from talking. We got into this a little bit earlier, but this particular article is a really helpful one to have in your arsenal, especially if you're working with other providers that might be a little skittish, or parents. But it just stems from a natural concern from parents and caregivers, and it's understandable. So the truth is that, AAC is actually linked to an increased chance of verbal speech improving and developing. And that comes from Miller and Romsky, those two studies. So this idea is false. And, not that I'm a huge proponent of throwing journal articles at parents and caregivers and colleagues. I think knowledge is power, and providing these as resources is great. However, how you also deliver the message and who you have deliver the message is very important as well. So tone and tact are everything. And so, it doesn't help to just throw a journal article at someone. Really having an informed conversation and really providing some really great, like, empirically validated examples is important, but also taking the time to have a nice, well-rounded conversation is even more impactful in most cases for this. And let the data speak for itself. That's the great thing about what we do as providers, is that we are very good at taking data and showing trends. And so if I can say anything, one of my my happiest days is when I can show a graph where I'm showing challenging behavior going down that's delivered and shared with me from, the BCBA, and functional communication going up. And even more so are the graphs that we do where we drop a phase line in and we indicate when we've started the use of an AAC device, and we see vocal communication, we see functional communication improving, and then we have our vocal communication down below, and all of a sudden we have a nice spike and we see it raise with the pairing of speech and the AAC device. So, those are some really great indicators as well, and some great visual proof that what you're doing is working. So here is poll number 3. So AAC can enhance social interactions when used appropriately with individuals with limited speech output and/or language, especially since technology is so commonly used today among young children, adolescents, teenagers, and adults. True or false? We'll give it a couple more seconds, and then we'll have Emily show us our results. All right, 100%. Yes, you all get a gold star. Absolutely. AAC is a great way to shape social interactions. And I gave you some examples from earlier from my own career. I'm sure you're thinking of a bunch from your own work and just in your everyday life as well. Okay, so this is often a question that pops up. Is the use of AAC stigmatizing? So is my son or daughter, is my client going to walk into a room and immediately be labeled as the individual with, a disability because they're using AAC? Well, if you think about it, I mean, technology is so common today that most individuals, if you think about yourself, you have your phone on you 24/7, I'm sure. We live in a society today where technology is always readily available. And, we really rely on technology for communication purposes. So if you're asking me this question, no, not at all. It's actually probably more stigmatizing if you don't have some form of technology in your hand these days, because I know even with my own kids, they have their iPads, they have Messenger Kids on it, they call their friends on it. There's so many gaming devices. And so it's not stigmatizing, especially nowadays when use of technology is so common. And if you look at this chart, here's some statistics in terms of the percent of US parents of a child age 11 or younger who say that as far as they know their child, if they ever use technology or not. So you can see TV, form of technology, a pretty high number there. You can see that tablet computer, we have a total of 67 there. So again, tablets are very popular. Smartphone. You have a desktop or laptop computer, and you have gaming device. And the funny thing about it is too, when you look at the ages, age of child 0 to 2, right? So is there a perfect age or a child that's too young to use any form of technology? Well, right there, 0 to 2, if you look at those numbers, no. They're being introduced at a very young age, all the way up to 11 years old. So, and my daughter, who actually just turned 11, I mean, she's been using technology in school forever. When she started the first grade, she was handed an iPad. That was her iPad, and it was connected to her name, her school ID, and that's what she takes her tests on and all of that stuff. And so, it's very common for kiddos to have access to technology throughout their school career. So is it stigmatizing? No, everyone's using something to help them and to further their education, especially nowadays with kiddos. There probably should be less technology. When you talk about resources, this is a great slide too. I'm just looking at time and I want to make sure we get through all of the slides and see if there's any other questions, but these resources are great. So we actually at Verbal Beginnings, we have partnerships with some of these companies. So Toby Dynavox, actually their rep in Maryland, has done an autism exploration with us before. She's wonderful. Her name's Lindsay, and she provides a whole host of information around funding and just support for parents, which is great. Easter Seals is another company that offers grants for individuals who may need help with funding for devices. Bridging Apps is another one that creates applications for AAC. AprilNet is a company we just started partnering with at VB, and they're wonderful. They're actually at no cost to us, and they will help work through the parent and individual going through a trial of a specific application or a specific device, and then help walk through communicating the results to insurance in order to help parents potentially get those funded through their insurance company. And the one thing I always tell parents and give providers caution on is that if an individual gets a device, if you go through insurance or you go through a private grant, that device becomes yours. That is your device, your words, your voice. If you go through a school system, it belongs to the school. And so when your child graduates from that school or that school system, that device goes back to the school. And so it's really important to make sure that you really have a lot of information regarding funding and to make sure that if at all possible, you get a device that belongs to the individual. So that way it goes with them and it can continue to grow with them. And then Autism Speaks has really, really great information regarding just a lot of resources out there, but also would be a great place to look for grant money and support with funding and other places that provide perhaps like trial devices and such. All right, we did it. We made through. You all suffered through listening to me cough, but I'd love to have the opportunity to for the next couple minutes if anybody else has any last questions.
Yes, we have a couple questions. And while we answer those, Dr. Nelson, do you mind just flipping to the last slide so everyone can see next month's presentation while we go through
Sure.
this? Thank you. And for those of you who this is your first one, we hope to see you in future ones. Our next month presentation is on OT and ABA, a remarkable partnership by one of our wonderful OTs here at VB. Okay, so we've got time for these 3 questions here.
Great.
First one is, when a child is able to communicate with single words and the goal for AAC is really to help bring more speech and communication, please give an example of how we could use that AAC in that setting.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we had a couple of examples during the talk, but I can dive deeper into this. There's so many questions. So sentence building is a huge one. So usually when we start teaching single words, we typically are teaching nouns, right? We're teaching labels or mans for food, activities, people, or perhaps we're teaching tax when we're labeling like mom, dad, therapist in the classroom. And so a lot of ways we'll use the device to expand upon that is by teaching carrier phrases to those tax or those mans that have reached proficiency and have been maintained over time. So we might start doing things like during a tacting program, I see, I hear, I feel, things that you can actually like tangibly label through your senses, for example. That's something that PEC speaks a lot to too in the Bondi and Frost research in their protocol. When it comes to mans, I shudder sometimes because I feel like a lot of times we overplay the I want phrase because there are so many different ways we can teach someone to ask for something that they want or need. Can I have, I need, those sorts of things. But then when we will work on, expanding upon the mans, we go to 2-word mans, we go to 3-word mans. So again, we're teaching those language aspects of things. So we're building on the grammar part of language. And that visual representation of the building of the sentence is so helpful because for a lot of these kiddos, they have really good visual memory. And so if you can attach for example, and I think it was like one of the earlier slides where they were using a tablet and you saw the color coding on the screen. If you teach them, basically they're learning, okay, orange plus green plus purple equals a sentence. And then what's even more important are the types of words that fit into that orange category. So you might teach them to sort all subject words or all nouns. And you might teach them, and they all have an orange background. Then when you're teaching them to sort verbs, they might be all green and they go into the green category of words. And then if you have purple, those are your objects, which can also be nouns. But a certain class of nouns, and those will go into your purple category. So when I'm building sentences, I have to follow the color pattern, but I also have to be cognizant of what words I'm using. And so devices can be really helpful in teaching that skill according to neurotypical development.
Let's squeeze in one last question. I know it's 6 o'clock. All right. Really quickly. Does learning style affect which device should be used for a client?
Yes, for sure. I think that's a great question and something that's often overlooked. Learning style is very important. Um, and that can be, that can be incorporated in the use of a device. So I'll give you an example to end on, which will be a good one for you. So I had a child that had a visual impairment and was working with a vision specialist. And for obvious reasons, she was having a very hard time with picture exchange communication. So we actually used cardstock on top of foam board, and we cut out foam board so that the icons were a little bit weighted and heavier, so they were easier for her to pick up, because otherwise she was having a very hard time seeing and then kind of manipulating the icon. And then sometimes she would stim on the icon. So we realized that with weighted pictures, actually her learning style, she did much better with things that offered resistance. And so we used the foam board, and then we also had bright yellow backs to the icons with a very sharp and thick black edging and contrast, and just feeding into her vision strengths and her learning style when it came to her vision, and also anything like tangible. Her sense of touch helped her tremendously go through. She like rapidly went through the phases of PACS. The other thing is that some kids can show like a side preference. So that's something to look at as well, right? They'll just always go for the thing that's on the left-hand side. So some of these things take learning, and sometimes you have to break a chain, a behavior pattern or a chain of behavior prior to really increasing speech. So really looking at learning style and really looking at history of learning is important when looking at implementing AAC. And sometimes you have to break some error patterns before you actually then go ahead for acquisition.
I'm going to squeeze one more question because I think that
Yep.
this is a great question and probably a lot of people are wondering the answers to this. So before we go, one last one. Is there training that is offered once a parent chooses to use AAC? I'm assuming probably an AAC device.
Yeah, so your provider should be offering training. So we always offer follow-up and training with parents. We offer videos of sessions. We also offer progress meetings to go over. And then that's why we work so collaboratively with the BCBAs, because the BCBAs have the added luxury of those parent training sessions where they can incorporate what we use during the session for this. However, there are workshops available. There are online workshops that you can go to for AAC, but I find the most effective trainings are the ones that are tailored towards your child or tailored towards your client, because much like some of the things that you can watch on YouTube or on TV, they don't pinpoint the specific needs of your individual. They kind of give you a global view, and sometimes not everything fits. So I do think that if you're working with a very skilled clinician and someone who is knowledgeable in the area of AAC, those best trainings are those one-to-one trainings with your provider.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Nastin. This was such a great presentation. I feel like so many great questions came through. Thank you to all the families who have participated and joined us this evening. We're going to wrap it up here, but we hope to see you at our next presentation on May 14th. All right,
Yeah,
everybody have a great evening. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.